Hey guys, this is Connors from Gunroom.tv and we've got something a little special here for you today. I'm here with Ed Harris, a longbow enthusiast, to talk to you about, believe it or not, longbows. So, Ed, thank you very much for coming down and seeing us. How did you get into longbows?
Well, thanks very much for having me today. Longbows, so I got into medieval reenactment about 10 years ago after just being interested by history for some time, basically my whole life I suppose. I've shot a few bows when I was a child, like many people have done, and it's just an area of the reenactment that I wanted to investigate and be interested in. So I started off, like most people in medieval reenactment, with longbows, with quite a small bow, similar to this one here. Not this bow, the old bow blew up once, long story. And I started off with like a 50-pound bow, which is good for most use. It's not the most accurate bow for actual genuine medieval use, but it does the job and it looks the part for people. But I wanted to kind of do something a little bit more interesting. I wanted to try and replicate someone who actually shot at the real sort of poundages, or get as close as I can to shooting the real sort of poundages that people used to shoot 500, 600 years ago. So I started doing quite a bit of training, and then went and bought this large bow here. So the sort of weights bows were used were probably within the region of, say, 90 pounds to 150.
That's a lot more than that then.
It's a lot more than this one here, yes, exactly. I can't say an exact poundage or narrow it down too much, because we're talking about a period that covers many hundreds of years, and the only examples of bows we have really from that era come from the Merry Rose, which sunk 130 years after the Battle of Agincourt. Battle of Agincourt, commonly thought of as maybe the heyday of the longbow. So it's bows that came from a boat, compared to Agincourt, which was a land battle in France. It's quite a different situation, but we generally feel that they are probably within the region of, say, 90 to 150, possibly larger. Who really knows exactly? So this bow here, at 30 inches of jaw, is about 90 to 95 pounds. It's a modern reproduction of a longbow. It's a laminate. So this is an EP body with a hickory front to it, and that just provides like a lot of the power of the bow comes from the EP body, and then the spring comes from the hickory front, which kind of replicates the real bows.
So this is a U bow, is that right?
A U bow that is about 110 pounds at 30 inches of jaw, so it's quite a bit more again than this, but it's still
But
probably...
it's smaller.
Sorry?
But it's a smaller bow. So
it's a shorter bow, yes. It's about 4 or 5 inches shorter. What makes a U-bow special is that you can see it's a natural lamination. This is an artificial lamination, two woods bonded together. This bow has a natural lamination of the dark heartwood and the outer sapwood. So the bows...
This is as the tree grew in that manner?
Exactly, yes. So the bow would have been taken, the wood for the bows is taken from the outside of the tree. They don't just get any old bit of the tree and cut it up. It has to be taken from the outside of the tree where the heartwood meets the sapwood. You get the right ratio of heartwood to sapwood, and then you have the dense core heartwood providing the power of the bow. And then you have the springy sapwood that helps hold the thing together.
I think everyone knows no bow is any good without arrows, and these don't look like arrows I've ever seen before.
Yes, so these are mostly based on arrows that came out of the Merry Rose. So the Merry Rose obviously sunk quite a bit later than the Middle Ages, but there's so many examples of arrows that came out of there that it's the best example we have. So I made these arrows myself. I purchased the heads from one person, I purchased the shafts from someone else, and shaped a few bits, put them together myself. Yeah. So the arrow itself, just to kind of give it a very rough run over, you've got a horn nock reinforcing the end here, just to protect it against the power of the string pushing down. The length of the fletches, which is based on the sort of lengths that came out of the Merry Rose. The green compound here is made from beeswax and copper acetate verdigris compound, which is it's a recipe that I got from a chap called Will Sherman, who's very knowledgeable about this type of thing. This arrow here is made of ash. It is 1/2 inch at the head to 3/8 of an inch at the knot. And this arrow here is poplar. Both two woods that we used quite often. Poplar is quite a bit lighter, but it's still very, very strong wood. Ash is good for maybe a slightly heavier bow, But yeah, they're both fantastic woods.
I just want to talk a little bit about the head styles that you have here, because these are unlike anything I've ever seen. I mean, you've got like this long, thin one here, and you've got like this shorter, blunter style here. Now, these don't look like they've come off of a machine.
No, those are hand forged.
Yeah.
Those are handmade from steel. So the longer one here, long and thin, if you shot that against thick armour, it's likely to bend because it's long and thin. It's going to flex, but it's great at finding a hole, say in chainmail, for example. So it can pierce through and pop the links open and do damage against the right sort of target. So that might be a slightly earlier type of armour-piercing head. This is a slightly later version. It's shorter, so it's a lot more rigid. It can transmit the power to actually try and have some effect of getting through sheet steel, getting through the armour of the time. So
these are armour-piercing arrows.
They are, but whether you can actually shoot through steel plates of armour is a whole nother question.
I suppose, like you were saying earlier, a lot of this is speculation based off of what little historical evidence we have, and we don't truly know what was used for what purpose.
That is true. There is a lot of experimental archaeology that has gone on with medieval archery, and a lot of it is fantastic, but it's not as simple as an arrow will go through armour. And just because, say, the English army won the Battle of Agincourt doesn't mean that an arrow will go through armour. It's never as simple and as black and white as that. The knights, the soldiers, they had lots of gaps in their armour. There were thinner parts, there were thicker parts. They often I suspect they waited until they were only about 10 to 20 metres away until they actually shot, so you had the full power of the arrow hitting somebody, as opposed to this whole Hollywood example of an arrow dropping down from a long way, and you lose all the power basically from a long distance. It doesn't work like that. But you need everything working behind you, which is why you have the heavy shaft. You have the long heavy shaft, the big thick ends to help it handle the power of the bow, the short head that helps keep the rigidity of the head, so it transmits all the power into the target. Whether you actually pierce the armour or not, I don't think is actually completely relevant. It's not completely necessary.
This is super interesting and exciting for me. I just want to see the bows being shot now.
Okay.
So shall we move on and do that? So I'm guessing that these bows aren't in a ready to shoot state. There's a few things you need to do before you can shoot them, I'm guessing?
Yes, that's correct. They're not strung at the moment. The string is just lying loose on the bow. You can't leave. It's best not to leave the string actually on the bow on both nocks on each side, because it leaves the bow under tension. It's not good for it in the long run. It can basically lose its power.
Sure.
So in the past, most people probably would have done a system where you'd hook the bow up against your foot, push against one side, holding onto the middle, and pushing the string onto the bow like so. A lot of people still do that. Yeah. I personally don't like to do that on the larger bows because it can hurt the back a little bit more.
So this black string you're using here is like an assisting device?
We just call this a bowstringer. This is basically just a piece of paracord because it's nice and strong, and just use it. Put your feet in the middle. You have it hooked onto the nock here, where the bowstring itself is already on the nock, and then on this far end you have a second nock further end. We call that bastard nock, and then you have the actual nock the string will be on a bit closer in.
So that's actually designed to have one of these bowstringing strings on it?
It is exactly designed to do that. And then you pull up like so, hook into place, and then slowly let it back. That is hooked in nicely. And in the middle, make sure it's actually hooked in properly. Okay. As it's a nice warm day, this bow is not as stiff as it sometimes is. The bows definitely feel different when it's colder compared to when it's warmer. Yeah. If it's a nice warm day outside, the bows can be lovely and soft. They're still quite powerful, but they don't creak in the same sort of way that they do when it's cold. So, bracer and a tab. The braces have been used for hundreds of years in various different forms. There were lots of fantastic braces that came out of the Mary Rose as well, one of the many artefacts that come from there. So people did use them, and people still use a bracer. It's literally just slots onto the arm, and when you shoot, if you don't release completely perfectly, the string will wobble forward and it can slide against the inside of your arm, and it can be quite painful if it does do that. So this is quite a heavily reinforced bracer just to make it more comfortable. and the tab itself, the finger tab, is just to protect the fingers against the bowstring when you're pulling back. Otherwise, you can pull it back with just your fingers, but it'll make your fingers very numb, and I like to keep the feeling in my fingers for
and again, it'll be like holding an 8-stone person up by just a string. If anyone's had like a carrier bag that's starting to get a bit thin and you feel that pressure on there when you've got like 5 kilos in the bag, can you imagine what it's like trying to lift a person up like that?
Yeah.
As we're getting ready, you've gone and picked up this bow, which looks completely different to all the others. What's going on here?
This is a bow I like to do a bit of basic target shooting with, and just generally warming up. It's just a lovely toy. It's again not the most historically accurate, but it is a reproduction of like a Mongolian type of bow. It does actually use fiberglass inside the arms, so it's a modern bow in that sense, but it's super reliable. It's really fun to shoot, and it's a bit lower poundage than the other one, so I like to shoot it a lot to start with, just because it helps warm the body up. You don't go down the gym and start bench pressing your top end weight. You warm up first. So this is basically a bit of warming up. As it's quite a different sort of bow, it's a lot shorter, and as you may have noticed going on before with reference to the bastard knock, it doesn't have any of that. So this one has a slightly different technique on how to draw it, how to string it.
So I'm actually guessing that the bow is currently flexed backwards. Is that right?
Yes, the bow shoots that way.
So, and I can see you've got these little grooves on the back there which you're putting this string into. Is that to help you string it?
Those are just part of the construction of the bow. I couldn't say exactly what those are for. Not an expert in that field. It's probably not the best way to string, but there we go.
And this is your warm-up bow?
That's just a little warm-up bow. This is probably about 40–45 pound draw. The reason why I want to exaggerate the technique, which is not necessary for a low poundage bow such as this, but to shoot a heavier bow, you want to utilise as many muscles across your back and in your draw arm as you can. So they often refer to as archers shooting in the bow, and you do lean into the bow when you actually draw it, when you draw a heavy bow. So you would lean forward, use your whole back, and you should always feel your shoulder blades kind of coming together, so you are pivoting basically from this far end all the way around.
Ed, that was some incredible shooting. Like at first sort of watching you thinking, well, how hard could it be? But then you actually let us try to draw one of the bows, and the 90-pound bow, I couldn't get a full draw on it with all my might.
It's good.
I tried.
It was good.
Yeah, and your Mongolian style bow as well. We've done a little bit of shooting with that under Ed's supervision, and whilst we can draw it at 40 pounds, it's still there's some strength required to do that, and I can really appreciate how difficult it is to draw the bows, and I can also appreciate how mistakes can happen, because I think we've lost an arrowhead. We had one casualty of war from today. It's the arrowhead popped off when it hit a steel target that was just behind the bale of hay. Yeah. What I thought was interesting is that the 2.2 bullets that have hit this target in the past splattered, but they don't leave as much of a mark on there as the arrowhead did. Well, they leave like a cosmetic blemish, like a splattering of lead, whereas that's actually taken a tiny little chunk out of the steel down the other end. So yeah, something to be respected if using one of these. But Ed, thank you so much for coming down. It's been truly enlightening and really interesting learning about all this. Anytime. So it's been Ed and Connor's with Gunroom.tv, and I hope to see you soon.